Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello everybody and welcome to the international edition of Future Hacker. This is your host, Maria Taiji, and today we're talking to Mihir Naik. Mihir is an architect and urban designer, and most recently has been working in India leading designs for large-scale mixed-use developments, where he tries to create developments that are ecologically, socially, and economically sustainable. He's a technology enthusiast and an eternal optimist, and believes that good design is the single most important differentiator in creating value and improving quality of life. Hi Mihir, how are you doing today?
Hi Maria, hi team. I'm very glad that you could have me here today. Looking forward to talking to you.
That's awesome, and that's such an interesting topic. Let's begin by talking about sustainability and innovation in construction materials and digital production technologies. So basically, instead of devastating nature, as we have been doing for so many years, there's this whole movement of using our wastes by reusing, recycling, and upcycling. There's plastic wasted, CO2 absorbing materials, biomechanics, and the list goes on and on. So how's the research in this area going? How is it affecting architects and designers? And how long will it take us to spread the adoption in houses and buildings around the world?
Maria, I think what we speak of are actually more symptoms of the problem. The problem is much deeper, and I think it has to do with the definition of sustainability itself. So for anything to be truly sustainable, it has to have a triple bottom line. It has to be socially and culturally sustainable. It has to be ecologically or environmentally sustainable. It has to be economically sustainable as well. Without all these three goals together, no development or no design can be truly sustainable, And the problem right now is that everyone looks at least only one or two of these as the driving principles and forget about the other. And anytime you do that, you will never have a truly lasting, sustainable, product, design or place. So the entire effort that I have along with my team being putting in is kind of making sure that all these three things happen simultaneously. And all these also are not so much, at odds with each other. They complement each other. Socially successful projects which kind of create communities, make designs and places and architecture more attractive, and hence add value. Environmental sustainability, as we all know, makes a place more livable, reduces life cycle costs. In the long run, creates great value. Economic sustainability obviously is something that is the reason for businesses to exist, and that is the one that people look at first. And if that becomes the guiding principle and the only principle, then one is bound to have a lot of problems. It doesn't really become a long-term success. In terms of adoption of sustainability at grassroots levels, I think the government has to incentivize both owners and businesses to adopt technologies, to adopt recycling, to adopt more sustainable practices. This can be through taxation, this can be through economic policies, this can be through kind of funding research that allows mass production of some of these technologies, and also by making laws that make it compulsory. Once all these things come into place, I think everything will be adopted quite soon, quite easily, and quite fast, because the awareness already exists. Everyone knows that, what we are doing is wrong and we have to do better, but it is just not convenient, mostly. And however much we say that we try and we have to try, but really it comes down to this aspect of it being convenient. If you can make sustainability convenient, then nothing will stop us from making it better.
So that's really interesting, Mihir. I like that you put those into three pillars. So it needs to be sustainable, both socially, economically, and ecologically as well, right? So there's something that I read that I loved, which is the need to start making friends with nature instead of fighting it. There's this case I read about the future of stormwater and how Kansas City was able to manage and decrease the occurrence of floods through the combination of simple techniques. For example, having a green infrastructure to soak up excess rainfall, integrated with technologies such as sensors to monitor its flow in real time and track the weather forecasts. So when you read about this and you see the construction of green buildings, it's such a no-brainer that makes me wonder what is taking cities not to start implementing it ASAP. So what do you think are the main challenges, besides those three pillars you mentioned? And what could you share with us regarding the developments in those areas?
So I think one of the biggest reasons for slow adoption of technology actually has nothing to do with technology itself. I think it has to do more with the lack of multidisciplinary skills in the industry. What that means is an architect is trained in a specific way, an engineer is trained in a specific way, a project manager is trained in a specific way, a client or a developer has his own set of incentives. And there is nowhere where all these things can come together to talk a common language. So what does that mean? As an architect, the focus of design is to create a landmark, an icon, maybe be sustainable, but it is still not analytical process in the same way. I mean, what they did here in Kansas is actually a very good example, because they took very simple techniques, they took feedback from sensors, and then they created a design that could respond real time. Right now, this is actually the simplest manner of doing good design. You take feedback and you design as per that feedback. Currently, there is no feedback system for design that exists really, especially in buildings. It's more about architect's vision. Engineers help fulfill that vision. There is a bit of sustainability. There is a bit of technology that goes into it, primarily in terms of construction, some in terms of sensors. But it doesn't come together as a cohesive whole. I think there is a little bit more about this that as we go ahead in the discussion, I'll talk more about. But the point is that a city cannot be looked at as a homogeneous or a monolith in composition. It is formed of small communities. Each one has their own goals, their own incentives. And the idea is that we have to create a common framework where everyone can work together, so that sustainability is not a zero-sum game, meaning one person's loss is not someone else's win, and everyone benefits. So there is the whole idea of the architectural or design education that has to be upgraded to take into account these things. There has to be the government and the incentivizing by the government for adoption of these things. Technology has to chip in terms of providing the means and the use of the technology. There has to be analytics that kind of take all this data and crunch it meaningfully to come up with some sort of principles or answers, which then would be applied to design. I know it's a very wide topic and probably something that would take an entire session. But in essence, there is a lack in the education paradigm. There is a lot of technologies that need to come in and be understood and adopted. And then simply some of these measures need to be taken that are not so wide scale or so large, but small gestures or small moves, which will make a big difference. The fundamental difference here is also the fact that there is a lot of data that comes in. What do you do with the data? That data has to be crunched by someone in some way, and then some meaningful result has to come out. And that is where I think the big problem of design lies today. And that's what I mean by a lack of multidisciplinary skills. Right now, the architect has a vision that he kind of wants to build, and it is not led by many of these kind of data points. That's how one would put it simply.
Yes, it's interesting that you brought this up, because that's one thing that we've been learning here in Future Hacker, is that it always comes back to education, qualification, being able to work together as a team, and industries that are not used to those different kind of skills having to somehow to adopt that. It doesn't matter which industry we're talking about, we always end up coming back to this topic, which is education, right? Yeah. So besides the green buildings, there's this whole movement of developing digital, fully integrated buildings that, as you mentioned, are collecting the data, getting all the feedback, the entire usage, like water, energy, temperature, oxygen level. And through artificial intelligence, it optimizes itself. So I read about this case of Sinclair Hotel, and it's such a great example. They actually managed to save a third of energy consumption by using digital electricity. So imagine that on a larger scale, right? Could you share with us any developments in the smart buildings areas and the impact that is going to have on us?
I think we have just barely scratched the surface in terms of, how technology can impact the built environment and design and construction. There is so much that is out there that is ripe for application in terms of, construction. Currently, most of the research or most of the stuff that one talks about has to do with 3D printing, which is again a way of more efficient construction, faster construction, less wastage in terms of construction. But currently, the scale does not exist for it to kind of, be meaningfully adopted. The other part that I think has a huge amount of potential is sensors and then big data. So, as we are putting sensors into everything, there is a lot of data that is coming out. There is so much information that is coming out which can actually really drive the design of the future. It can tell us what patterns we are following daily, hourly, monthly, seasonally, what are the changes that have happened over 10 years, 5 years, for a generation, how things have moved. And there is an immense amount of data. And this data is pretty much useless because there is no human way possible for anyone to sift through all of this and find the patterns and find the principles that are guiding these things. And that's where things like big data and artificial intelligence come in. And I think once we are able to somehow find a way of sifting and sorting and identifying these trends and these, maybe forecast them, or at least have some kind of real-time management of resources, I think we will definitely end up saving a lot of energy. And I think we'll also optimize construction. We will have way less wastage. This, I think, is a big promise and a big way forward in terms of design, construction, and actually living, because what these sensors or data are doing is kind of quantifying, measuring, evaluating how we live, and how we consume and what we consume and how much we consume and in how much time we consume what. But it's just so much of it that there is no way to sift through it. So with artificial intelligence coming in, with all this data being analyzed, I think there is a huge potential that we may come up with some massive breakthroughs in terms of design, construction, and urban design. Because again, as I said, currently, architects basically get a brief which comes from a place of, business. It comes in terms of some kind of areas, some kind of intention of creating an icon. And then everything else is kind of added around that to create a building, and then that building or many of those buildings create a precinct. And then those precincts connected by roads or by other means of access make a city. It's an evolutionary process. But in the last maybe 50 years, the entire process of development has changed so much that, earlier it was a small incremental process of growth. Now large swaths of land kind of get developed in one shot. We have in the last, I think, 30 years constructed more than what has been constructed in the 100 years before. And I think in the last 100 years, we have constructed more than what had been constructed in 3,000 years, So this cannot go on in the same way. And these tools, which are currently, I think, in a very nascent environment, they are very small. When they kind of come on their own, these really will be drivers of design and development.
There's definitely a lot of exciting things that is going to happen in this industry with the use of technology, as you mentioned. So let's move a little about what's going on today. Before COVID, the trend was to make those tiny living spaces common in big cities better optimized. So we see a lot of examples of bedrooms turning into living rooms, office space, and even gyms. All those furnitures with multiple uses coming from the ground, the wall, the ceiling. But then, with the pandemic, it seems the trend changed dramatically and people started moving to larger places, to houses closer to the nature, to the countryside, now that, at least for some sectors, working remotely was made possible. So, the quality of life seems to have turned into a priority compared to before. So how do you see this affecting both the construction and the smart furniture market?
A lot has been said about COVID and what it has done to us and our lives and our cities. But what I feel that COVID has done more than anything else has brought into sharp focus some of the major inequalities that exist in our cities. And at the same time, it has hastened the arrival and adoption of some long pending trends. Things that we were seeing happening, kind of moving slowly, organically, have suddenly kind of been adopted really quickly. And work from home, for me, is one of these examples, one such example. It's been happening over the years, and, there have been scenarios when people have been working from home, and many companies allow that. And, there is a mix of, but there is always some office and some structure to the whole practice. What has happened now suddenly is that because we have been forced to come and do this in such a short manner, a lot of exciting, quick evolution has happened. There is some good things that have come out of this, and I feel there is going to be some bad things that have come out of this as well. One of the two aspects that is important to realize is that workspaces are also public and community places, So while you can create the most efficient work from home environment for yourself, you have everything, you have your computer, you have your internet, you have your printers and everything. What you can never get is that social connect, the meeting of other people. I think that is something that is really missing due to this. And this is, I think, one of the main reasons why work from home will never become a permanent fixture for everybody, because most exciting things happen when people meet and talk and discuss. That is one part. The good part is that a lot of people have now also started understanding the importance of good design, have started understanding the importance of some of these brands, some of the designers who have done very good work in this field. I think that has been something that will grow from this experience. But I think there is a negative impact, which may be long term, is that co-sharing and other sharing economy initiatives will suffer because now people don't trust each other in the same way. So unless I really know you, you are family. I would be very afraid of sharing workspace, sharing cabs, sharing any of these things. The other thing is that, public transport also will suffer in this because, suddenly, as we are noticing, there is a huge uptake in purchasing of private vehicles as well. So this is going to be a problem in the long run. And I think if earlier pandemics, like, the ones that we had maybe 100 years ago are anything to go by, this should kind of resolve itself in a year or so, and human beings always kind of have a way of returning back to the mean. But some of these things will, I think, remain, and I think the smart furniture market is something that has evolved very quickly from this and will really remain for the long run. It's not something that's going to go away.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me in here. So listen, everybody, this is the end of our first episode, but stay tuned. We are continuing this conversation with Mihir about architect and urban design. Stay tuned for the second episode, everybody.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.